The crisp, sickening sound of tearing paper echoed over the morning hum of JFK's Terminal 4. The airport security supervisor smirked, holding up the shredded biometric page of the dark blue passport. "Fake documents are a federal offense, little girl. You're not flying anywhere today." What he didn't know was that the black woman standing before him in faded sweatpants wasn't just another passenger. She had just signed a $6 billion acquisition. He hadn't just grounded a traveler, he had just grounded his new CEO. The rain lashed against the tinted windows of the Lincoln Navigator as it glided down the Van Wyck Expressway toward John F. Kennedy International Airport. In the back seat, 34-year-old Jasmine Hayes rubbed her temples, trying to massage away a migraine that had been building for the better part of 72 hours. She was exhausted, but it was the kind of exhaustion that tasted like absolute victory. For the past 3 days, Jasmine had been locked inside a glass-walled conference room at Kirkland and Ellis, one of Manhattan's most ruthless corporate law firms. Alongside an army of antitrust lawyers and private equity backers, she had executed the impossible, a $6.4 billion hostile takeover of Vanguard Airlines, one of the nation's largest and oldest legacy carriers. Vanguard had been bleeding money for a decade. Its board of directors, a boys' club of out-of-touch executives who had run the once-proud airline into the ground, had laughed when Jasmine's holding company first made a bid. They didn't think a young black woman from the south side of Chicago, who had built her fortune turning around distressed logistics companies, had the capital or the fangs to take them down. They had vastly underestimated her. By 4 a.m. this morning, the final signatures had been inked. The board was effectively dissolved, and Jasmine Hayes was the new chief executive officer and majority shareholder of Vanguard Airlines. "Ms. Hayes," the voice of her chief of staff, Fiona, crackled through the car's Bluetooth speakers. "The press release goes live in exactly 12 hours. The Wall Street Journal and Forbes already have the embargoed drafts. Are you sure you don't want me to arrange a Gulf Stream for your flight to London? The Vanguard acquisition is done. You don't have to fly commercial. You own the fleet now." Jasmine let out a soft laugh, adjusting the oversized faded Yale University hoodie she had thrown on before leaving the hotel. "That's exactly why I have to fly commercial, Fiona. Vanguard's customer satisfaction ratings are in the gutter. The on-time performance is abysmal, and the frontline staff morale is worse. If I fly a private G650 into Heathrow, I learn nothing. I need to see the rot from the inside, unannounced, unrecognized." "Understood," Fiona replied, her tone shifting to professional resignation. "You are booked in Seat 1A on Vanguard Flight 88 to London Heathrow, first-class global elite status. Do you have your passport?" Jasmine patted the front pocket of her Lululemon leggings. "Right here. I'll call you from the Centurion Lounge before boarding." As the SUV pulled up to the curb at Terminal 4, Jasmine stepped out into the biting New York chill. She looked nothing like a billionaire corporate raider. With her natural hair pulled back into a messy bun, wearing a plain black baseball cap, pulled low, an oversized hoodie, and comfortable sneakers, she looked like a tired graduate student heading home for the holidays. This was entirely by design. Jasmine despised the performative stiffness of corporate attire outside the boardroom. More importantly, her anonymity was her greatest weapon. Nobody in the airline industry knew what she looked like outside of a few blurry Forbes profile photos, and she intended to keep it that way until the press conference tomorrow. Terminal 4 was a cathedral of glass steel and chaotic human energy. The scent of overpriced roasted coffee mingled with the anxiety of thousands of travelers rushing to find their gates. Jasmine navigated the massive departure hall with the quiet confidence of someone who spent more time in the sky than on the ground. She bypassed the sprawling snake-like queues of the main economy check-in and headed directly toward the far right of the terminal, where the frosted glass partitions of the Vanguard Airlines Global Elite check-in and priority security screening area stood. This exclusive lane was designed for the airline's highest-paying customers. It featured a dedicated TSA screening checkpoint, partnered with Clear Plus, ensuring that first-class passengers could go from the curb to the lounge in under 10 minutes. Jasmine adjusted her backpack, a well-worn leather tote that currently held her laptop, and the legally binding contracts that gave her total control of the very building she was standing in. She walked onto the plush blue carpet, leading to the priority podium. She was just looking forward to a glass of champagne and a long, uninterrupted sleep across the Atlantic. But the universe and a man named Derek Lawson had other plans. Derek Lawson had been a TSA supervisor at JFK for 12 years, and in that time, his bitterness had calcified into a permanent sneering disposition. He was a man who craved authority, but had repeatedly been passed over for promotions to Federal Security Director. To compensate for his stalled career, Derek ruled the Terminal 4 elite lane like his own personal fiefdom. He prided himself on his intuition, which was in reality a thinly veiled cocktail of prejudice, racial profiling, and class resentment. Standing behind the podium, Derek adjusted his blue uniform shirt, his eyes scanning the approaching passengers. He nodded deferentially to a silver-haired businessman in a tailored Brioni suit, waving him through with a polite, "Good morning, sir. Have a safe flight." Then his gaze landed on Jasmine. To Derek, the Vanguard Global Elite lane had a specific aesthetic. It was reserved for hedge fund managers, aging celebrities, and tech executives. It was not meant for a young black woman in faded sweatpants and a bulky hoodie carrying a scuffed leather bag. As Jasmine stepped up to the entrance of the VIP lane, Derek physically stepped out from behind the podium, planting himself squarely in the middle of the blue carpet, blocking her path. "Hold it right there," Derek barked, holding up a stiff hand. His voice was loud enough to turn the heads of several passengers waiting in the nearby standard security line. Jasmine stopped, slightly startled. She pulled off one of her AirPods. "Excuse me, you're lost," Derek said, his tone dripping with condescension. He didn't ask a question, he made a statement. "Economy screening is that way down past the food court. Terminal 3 overflow. This lane is for first class and global elite members only." Jasmine felt a familiar, exhausting prickle of annoyance. It wasn't the first time she had been profiled, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But today, running on 2 hours of sleep and the adrenaline of a multi-billion-dollar buyout, her patience was remarkably thin. "I'm in the right place. Officer Fortador." Jasmine said, her voice smooth level and deliberately polite. "I'm flying first class on Flight 88 to Heathrow." Derek crossed his arms, his eyes raking over her casual attire with undisguised contempt. "Yeah, first class. Let me see the boarding pass. And the ID now." Usually the Clear kiosks and the airline agents handled the initial ticket verification, but Derek was interjecting himself as an unnecessary bottleneck. Jasmine didn't argue. She pulled her iPhone from her pocket, tapped the screen, and held up the digital Vanguard boarding pass. The screen brightly displayed the gold crest of the airline reading, "Hayes Jasmine. Seat 1. A. Flight 88. Global Elite." Derek stared at the glowing screen. For a split second, his brow furrowed in confusion. The cognitive dissonance was hitting him hard. He couldn't reconcile the prestigious digital ticket with the woman standing in front of him. Rather than admit his mistake and step aside, his ego doubled down. "Who bought this ticket for you?" Derek sneered, leaning in closer. "Company mileage pool. Or did someone just take a screenshot and send it to your phone?" Jasmine's eyes narrowed. The ambient noise of the terminal seemed to fade into a dull roar. "I bought the ticket," she replied, her voice dropping an octave, losing its friendly veneer. "With my own money. Now, if you'll excuse me my flight boards in 45 minutes, and I'd like to get to the lounge." She stepped forward to bypass him, but Derek shifted his weight, intentionally bumping his shoulder against hers to stop her progress. It was a microaggressive show of physical force meant to intimidate. "You don't move until I say you move," Derek hissed. "Phone screens can be faked. Screenshots can be doctored. Hand over your physical passport. Now." By now, a small crowd was beginning to notice the tension. Two middle-aged white women, dripping in designer brands, whispered to each other from the priority line. A businessman checked his Rolex, annoyed by the delay, but watching the confrontation with passive curiosity. Jasmine stood her ground. She knew exactly what Derek was doing. He was trying to provoke a reaction. He wanted her to raise her voice, to get angry, to fit the stereotype of the angry, unruly passenger, so he could call Port Authority police and have her dragged out of the terminal. It was a sick power play. But Jasmine had spent her entire adult life navigating rooms filled with powerful predatory men who wanted to see her fail. A mid-level airport security agent on an ego trip was nothing to her. Without a word, Jasmine reached into her pocket and retrieved her dark blue United States passport. She handed it to him. "Here. Verify it. Scan the chip. And then let me pass." Derek snatched the passport from her hand. He didn't just look at the photo page. He opened it with exaggerated suspicion, holding it up to the fluorescent lights of the terminal. He was hunting for a reason, any reason to put her in her place. Jasmine Hayes. He read the name aloud, dragging out the syllables to make it sound suspicious. He looked from the photo to her face, then back to the photo. "You don't look like a Jasmine Hayes who flies first class. You don't look like you belong in this terminal at all. And you don't look like a man who is going to have a job by the end of the day." Jasmine said the words, slipping out with a quiet, icy precision. Derek's head snapped up. His face flushed a dark, angry red. The threat wasn't screamed, it was delivered with the terrifying calm of an apex predator. And in that moment, Derek Lawson made the worst decision of his entire life. Derek's pride had been wounded, and in front of an audience of wealthy travelers no less. He could feel the eyes of the elite passengers on him. If he backed down now, if he let this woman in sweatpants disrespect him and walk through his checkpoint, he would look weak. "Oh, is that a threat?" Derek barked, stepping closer to Jasmine, invading her personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and stale coffee wafted off his uniform. "You think because you managed to scam your way into a first-class ticket, you can threaten a federal officer?" "It wasn't a threat, Officer Lawson," Jasmine said, her gaze fixed dead on his name tag. She committed his badge number to memory. "It was a forecast. Are you done inspecting my passport? The biometric chip will scan perfectly fine if you take it to the machine right behind you." Instead of walking to the scanner, Derek pulled a small ultraviolet flashlight from his tactical belt. He clicked it on, shining the purple light over the biometric data page. He was aggressively looking for missing watermarks or misaligned microprinting. He rubbed his thumb roughly over the edge of the laminated photo page. "The lamination feels loose," Derek declared loudly, ensuring his voice carried. "This feels like a secondary layer." "It's a 10-year passport issued 3 years ago," Jasmine replied evenly, though her heart was beginning to beat faster, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming righteous fury. "It has stamps from Geneva, Tokyo, and Frankfurt. It is completely valid. Do not damage my property." "Property of the United States government, actually," Derek corrected, with a smug, triumphant grin. He had found his angle. He had found a way to ruin her day. "And as an agent of the TSA, it is my duty to intercept fraudulent documents. Officer Lawson," Jasmine warned her voice, dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. I highly recommend you hand that back to me right now. You are making a monumental mistake. You have no idea who I am." "I know exactly what you are." Derek sneered, the racial and class implications hanging heavy in the air. "You're a fraud." With a sudden, deliberate motion, Derek took the stiff plastic data page of the passport and bent it backward. The thick material resisted, but he forced it, creating a sharp white crease in the protective coating. Jasmine's eyes widened slightly. "Stop." Driven by pure spite, Derek didn't stop. He pinched the corner where the lamination met the paper backing right near her photograph and pulled. "Reep." The crisp sound of tearing paper seemed to freeze the entire checkpoint. The ambient noise of the airport vanished in Jasmine's ears, replaced by the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Derek had physically torn the biometric page of her passport. The RFID chip was likely damaged, the structural integrity of the document was destroyed, and the passport was now legally void. A collective gasp rippled through the line of waiting passengers. Even the businessman in the Brioni suit looked shocked, taking a step back. Destroying a passenger's passport was an extreme, legally perilous action, strictly reserved for obvious proven counterfeits, after a supervisor and CBP agents had been called. Derek had done it purely out of spite, right in the middle of the terminal floor. Derek held up the torn document, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second as the reality of what he had done set in, but his ego quickly patched the crack. He tossed the mutilated passport onto the podium. "Fake documents are a federal offense, little girl." Derek said, his voice loud and authoritative, playing to the crowd. "The document is compromised. You're not flying anywhere today. In fact, I'm calling Port Authority to have you escorted off the premises." He reached for the heavy black radio on his shoulder. "Control, this is Checkpoint Alpha. I have a 1043 here. Unruly passenger with fraudulent documents. Need officers to—" Jasmine didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't launch into a physical altercation. Instead, a chilling, terrifying smile slowly spread across her face. It was the smile of a chess grandmaster who had just watched her opponent move his queen directly into a trap. She reached into her pocket, ignoring Derek entirely, and pulled out her iPhone. She didn't dial 911. She didn't pull up the Vanguard customer service line. She tapped a single name in her favorites, Fiona. The call connected on the first ring. "Fiona," Jasmine said, her voice echoing with absolute authority, entirely devoid of the fatigue that had plagued her earlier. The power in her tone was palpable. "Yes, Ms. Hayes. Cancel the 10 a.m. London meeting. I'm not making the flight." Derek scoffed loudly. "You got that right, you're not." Jasmine kept her eyes locked onto Derek's. "Next, I need you to make 3 phone calls. Call the TSA Federal Security Director for JFK. Call the Port Authority Chief of Police. And finally call Vanguard's Head of Airport Operations. Tell all 3 of them to get down to Terminal 4, Elite Checkpoint Alpha, immediately." Fiona's voice on the other end was instantly alert. "Is everything all right, Jasmine? Are you safe?" "I'm perfectly safe," Jasmine replied, her eyes never leaving Derek's suddenly pale face. "But it seems Vanguard Airlines has a severe pest control issue at its checkpoints. And as the new CEO, I'm going to exterminate it." Jasmine lowered the phone, slipping it back into her pocket. The silence at the checkpoint was deafening. Derek's hand hovered over his radio, frozen. The smugness had vanished from his face, replaced by a creeping, cold dread. He looked at the girl in the faded sweatpants, then down at the torn passport on the podium, and finally back up to her eyes. Eyes that held the weight and power of a $6 billion empire. Ayo. Derek stammered, his voice barely a whisper, the bravado suddenly drained from his body. "You wanted to see my credentials. Officer Lawson," Jasmine said softly, stepping closer to the podium until she was inches from him. "You're about to see all of them. The word hung in the air, suspended over the Vanguard Global Elite checkpoint, like a guillotine waiting to drop. CEO. Derek Lawson stared at the young black woman in the oversized Yale hoodie. His brain, rigidly wired to categorize people based on superficial metrics of wealth and power, violently rejected the information. It's a bluff, he told himself. It has to be a bluff. She's insane. She's a sovereign citizen, or one of those internet pranksters trying to get a viral video. You're out of your mind, Derek finally forced out, though his voice lacked the booming, arrogant bass it had possessed just 3 minutes earlier. He pointed a trembling finger at her. Vanguard Airlines is run by Lawrence Harding. I've seen him walk through this very checkpoint. You expect me to believe Lawrence Harding surrendered his voting shares and signed a golden parachute severance agreement at exactly 3:15 a.m. this morning. Jasmine interrupted her voice perfectly, even betraying no emotion. The SEC filings were electronically submitted at 4 a.m. If you had an ounce of situational awareness outside of terrorizing passengers, you might have caught the whisper on the Bloomberg terminals. But you don't. Derek swallowed hard. A bead of cold sweat formed at his hairline, sliding down his temple. He looked around desperately for validation. The small crowd of elite passengers, previously annoyed by the delay, was now entirely captivated by the unfolding drama. The businessman in the Brioni suit had actually taken out his phone and was quietly recording the interaction. Before Derek could attempt to double down on his sinking ship, the heavy, synchronized thud of tactical boots echoed on the polished tile floor. 2 Port Authority Police Department, PAPD officers, clad in dark blue uniforms with heavy duty belts, aggressively cut through the crowd. Derek had hit his radio panic button during his initial threat, and the response in a post-9/11 airport was always immediate. All right, what's the situation here, Lawson? The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man named Officer Miller, barked as he approached the podium. His hand rested cautiously near his utility belt. He scanned the scene, his eyes landing on Jasmine. Seeing a calm, unarmed woman in sweatpants, standing casually with her hands visible, Miller's tense posture relaxed slightly, though he remained thoroughly alert. Derek saw his lifeline. He immediately puffed out his chest, attempting to reclaim his authority in the presence of armed law enforcement. Officer Miller, thank God, Derek said, his voice regaining a desperate edge of hostility. I need this individual detained immediately. She presented a fraudulent United States passport, attempted to bypass federal screening, and is now impersonating a corporate officer of Vanguard Airlines to intimidate a TSA supervisor. Officer Miller turned his gaze to Jasmine. Ma'am, is this true? Jasmine didn't flinch. She slowly raised her hands, keeping her palms open and non-threatening. Officer Miller, my name is Jasmine Hayes. I am the newly instated Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Airlines. What is true is that I attempted to board my flight to London. What is also true is that Supervisor Lawson refused to electronically verify my boarding pass or my passport. She pointed a single perfectly manicured finger at the podium. Instead of scanning my passport, he accused me of counterfeiting, physically bent the document, and intentionally tore the biometric data page, destroying federal property and legally voiding my ability to travel. Miller's eyes followed her finger to the podium. There, lying next to Derek's keyboard, was the dark blue passport. The thick photo page was jaggedly ripped halfway across Jasmine's face. Miller's jaw tightened. He had worked airport security long enough to know the strict, unforgiving protocols regarding travel documents. Even if a passport was suspected to be completely fake, a TSA agent was required to call CBP Customs and Border Protection to have it verified and confiscated. You never physically destroyed a passport on a whim. That was a federal crime. Lawson, Miller said slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Did you rip that document?" "It's fake," Derek stammered, the panic fully returning to his chest. "The lamination was peeling. She's a fraud. She's threatening me with imaginary executives. Secure the document, officer." Jasmine commanded, gently, yet with undeniable authority. "I want it logged into evidence. Furthermore, I request that nobody leaves this immediate vicinity. My Chief of Staff has already contacted Helen Ross, the TSA Federal Security Director for this airport, as well as David Cole Vanguard's Vice President of Airport Operations. They are currently en route." Officer Miller looked at Jasmine. "People who were caught with fake passports usually tried to run. They panicked. They cried. They certainly didn't name-drop the highest-ranking federal official in the airport and demand they come to the scene." "Stay right here, ma'am," Miller said to Jasmine, before turning a fierce glare on Derek. "Lawson, step away from the podium. Do not touch that passport." "You can't be taking her side." Derek hissed his face, flushing crimson. "I am a federal supervisor. Arrest her." "Shut up, Derek," Miller snapped, stepping between the TSA agent and the passenger. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was in reality only 4 minutes. The tension at Checkpoint Alpha was so thick it could have been cut with a boarding pass. The passengers in line remained frozen in place, a captive audience to the spectacular implosion of an airport tyrant. Then the chaos of the terminal was pierced by the sound of running footsteps. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit was sprinting, actually sprinting down the concourse, dodging startled travelers and rolling luggage. His tie was flapping over his shoulder, and his face was a mask of absolute terror. It was David Cole Vanguard Airlines, VP of Airport Operations. Trailing closely behind him, walking with a furious, commanding stride, was Helen Ross. As the TSA Federal Security Director for JFK, she was the ultimate authority for everything related to security in the airport. She wore a sharp navy blazer and a deeply displeased expression. David Cole arrived at the checkpoint breathless. He bypassed the Port Authority officers, bypassed Derek, and stopped dead in his tracks in front of Jasmine. He had never met her in person, but he had spent the last 3 hours on an emergency video conference with the new transition team. He knew exactly who she was. David hurriedly buttoned his suit jacket, desperately, trying to catch his breath and project professional decorum. "Ms. Hayes," David panted, his voice laced with profound apology. "David Cole, VP of Operations. We weren't expecting you to fly out until the press embargo lifted tomorrow. I am so incredibly sorry. Are you hurt?" "What happened?" The collective gasp from the surrounding passengers was audible. Derek Lawson felt his knees go weak. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost, haunting his own checkpoint. The words "Ms. Hayes" echoed in his skull. The bluff wasn't a bluff. The woman in the faded Yale hoodie, the woman he had aggressively profiled, mocked and illegally detained, was the boss of the man who essentially ran the terminal. Jasmine offered David a small, tight smile. "I'm perfectly fine, David. Thank you for getting here so quickly. Unfortunately, I won't be making the London flight today." Helen Ross stepped forward, her badge flashing under the fluorescent lights. She looked at Derek, who was visibly shaking, then at Officer Miller, and finally at Jasmine. "Ms. Hayes, I am Director Ross. I was informed there was a severe incident involving one of my supervisors." Helen said, her tone professional, but deeply concerned. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply turned and pointed to the mangled passport on the podium. Director Ross. Jasmine said, "Your supervisor didn't like the way I looked. He didn't believe I belonged in the global elite lane. So rather than follow federal protocol and scan my biometric data, he decided to permanently void my ability to travel internationally by tearing my passport in half." Helen Ross's eyes darted to the podium. When she saw the destroyed dark blue booklet, her expression darkened into pure, unfiltered rage. The reckoning had arrived. Helen Ross walked slowly over to the podium. She didn't touch the passport. She merely leaned over it, inspecting the jagged tear through the lamination and paper. She took a deep breath, visibly trying to control her temper. In the post-9/11 aviation landscape, the TSA was under constant scrutiny. They battled daily against public resentment, congressional budget cuts, and operational failures. The absolute last thing Helen needed was a massive civil rights lawsuit and a catastrophic PR nightmare orchestrated by a billionaire CEO whose passport was illegally destroyed by a rogue agent. Helen turned slowly to face Derek. "Lawson, what did you do? Director 1. Derek choked on his words. His arrogant facade had completely crumbled, leaving behind a terrified small man. I suspected it was a fraudulent document. The lamination, it felt altered. I was trying to inspect the security threading. By ripping it in half, Helen demanded, her voice cracking like a whip across the silent checkpoint. Since when does standard operating procedure dictate physical destruction of a passenger's travel documents? If you suspected fraud, why wasn't CBP called? Why wasn't the document scanned on the biometric reader right behind you? Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. There was no defense. He had acted out of pure spite, and everyone in the room knew it. "I'll tell you why Director Ross," Jasmine interjected, stepping fully into the space between them. The atmosphere shifted. She was no longer just a wronged passenger. She was the CEO of Vanguard Airlines, taking command of her territory. He didn't scan it because he wasn't looking for fraud. Jasmine stated, her voice projecting clearly so that every passenger and officer could hear. He was looking to humiliate me. Because I am young, because I am black, and because I chose to wear a hoodie instead of a designer suit. He looked at me and decided I didn't belong in Vanguard's first-class lane. Jasmine unzipped her leather tote bag and pulled out a sleek iPad Pro. She tapped the screen a few times, bringing up a complex, data-heavy dashboard. When my firm began the acquisition of Vanguard Airlines, Jasmine continued, her eyes locking onto David Cole. I demanded access to all back-end customer service metrics. For the past 48 hours, I haven't slept. I've been reading through thousands of passenger complaints. She turned the iPad around, showing the screen to Helen Ross and David Cole. It was a heat map of TSA checkpoints at JFK, cross-referenced with Vanguard's elite passenger complaints. Checkpoint Alpha was glowing a violent, angry red. Over the last 3 years, Checkpoint Alpha, specifically during Supervisor Lawson's shifts, has generated a staggering 400% more random screening complaints from women of color than any other checkpoint in this airport, Jasmine revealed. He has an extensive history of aggressive behavior, microaggressions, and intentional delays targeting minority passengers. Vanguard's previous board of directors ignored these complaints because they didn't care. But I care. Derek looked like he was going to vomit. His dark secret, his petty racist fiefdom, wasn't just being exposed. It was being mathematically quantified and presented to his ultimate boss by a billionaire. "You aren't just a rude employee, Mr. Lawson," Jasmine said, her gaze pinning him to the spot. "You are a legal and financial liability to this airport, and you are a cancer to the customer experience I am trying to build for my airline." Jasmine turned back to Helen Ross. The deference in her tone was gone, replaced by hard corporate leverage. Director Ross, Vanguard Airlines pays a massive premium to the Port Authority and the TSA to maintain this dedicated global elite lane. If this is the standard of security and professionalism my most valued customers are subjected to, I will terminate that contract immediately. David Cole paled. "Ms. Hayes, please, let's not make any hasty..." Jasmine silenced him with a look. "I will shut down this lane, terminate the TSA Plus partnership, and hire private third-party security contractors, authorized under the SPP program, to run Vanguard's screening. JFK will lose millions in premium lane revenue, and the TSA will suffer a massive public embarrassment when I explain exactly why I did it at tomorrow morning's press conference." Helen Ross closed her eyes for a brief second. The threat was nuclear. The Screening Partnership Program SPP allowed airports to replace TSA agents with private security. If Vanguard initiated that process, citing blatant civil rights violations and illegal document destruction, heads would roll in Washington, and Helen's career would be over. "That will not be necessary, Ms. Hayes," Helen said sharply, her decision made. She turned to Derek. "Supervisor Lawson," Helen commanded, holding out her hand. "Your badge, your credentials, your radio." Derek gasped, tears of panic finally welling in his eyes. "Director, please, I have 12 yours in. You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Helen interrupted, her voice devoid of pity. "You have fundamentally violated core TSA protocols, destroyed federal property, and exposed this agency to astronomical liability. You are suspended immediately, pending a full federal investigation and likely criminal charges for the destruction of that passport. Badge, now." With trembling hands, Derek unclipped the silver TSA badge from his uniform shirt. He placed it in Helen's open palm. Next went his ID card. Finally, he unhooked his heavy shoulder radio. In less than 10 seconds, he had been entirely stripped of his authority. He wasn't a tyrant anymore. He was just an unemployed man in a cheap blue shirt. "Officer Miller," Helen said, turning to the Port Authority police. "Please escort Mr. Lawson to the security office to clean out his locker. He is to be removed from the terminal immediately. His SIDA badge is revoked. If he steps foot in the secure area of this airport, again arrest him for trespassing." "With pleasure," Director Officer Miller said, grabbing Derek by the bicep. The grip was not gentle. "Let's go, Lawson." As the police led a devastated, silent Derek away from the checkpoint, the previously frozen crowd of elite passengers erupted. It started with a single, slow clap from the businessman in the Brioni suit and quickly cascaded into genuine applause. They had watched a bully get absolutely dismantled. Jasmine didn't smile at the applause. She simply took a deep breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving behind the crushing weight of her exhaustion. David Cole stepped forward, looking at Jasmine with newfound awe and terror. "Ms. Hayes, I don't know what to say. I will personally oversee a complete overhaul of our lane partnerships. Whatever you need." "What I need," David, Jasmine said, rubbing her temples as the migraine flared back to life, "is my luggage retrieved from the belly of Flight 88 before it takes off. And then I need a car to take me back to Manhattan." "Of course," David nodded furiously. "I'll have it handled immediately. And your passport, we can expedite a replacement through our diplomatic contacts in D.C. by tomorrow afternoon." "Do that," Jasmine replied, reaching over to the podium to pick up the torn pieces of her passport. She looked at the mutilated document, then looked down the long concourse where Derek Lawson was being marched out of the building. She had wanted to see the rot from the inside. She had certainly found it. But as she walked away from the checkpoint, flanked by the VP of Operations and the TSA Director, Jasmine Hayes, knew one thing for certain. Vanguard Airlines was under new management, and the skies were about to change. The following morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, casting a brilliant golden light across the East River. But inside the 64th floor conference room of One World Trade Center, a severe storm was brewing. At precisely 8 a.m., the media embargo officially lifted. Every major financial news network from CNBC to Bloomberg flashed the same breaking headline across their ticker tapes: Vanguard Airlines acquired in $6.4 billion. Hostile takeover. Jasmine Hayes named CEO. Inside Vanguard's ultra-modern, glass-walled executive boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The remaining C-suite executives, those who hadn't been forced out with former CEO Lawrence Harding the night before, sat around the sprawling mahogany table in stunned, terrified silence. They were an assembly of older, mostly white men who had spent the last decade resting on their laurels, collecting massive performance bonuses, while the airline's reputation and stock price steadily plummeted into the abyss. At the far end of the table sat Jonathan Croft, Vanguard's Senior Vice President of Corporate Security. Croft was a man who prided himself on tough policies and aggressive risk management, though his definition of risk often aligned more with personal prejudice than actual threat assessment. He was currently sweating through his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, aggressively tapping his Mont Blanc pen against his leather portfolio. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Jasmine Hayes walked in, and the entire room collectively held its breath. She looked entirely different from the exhausted hoodie-wearing woman who had been harassed at JFK 24 hours earlier. Today she was wrapped in corporate armor, a sharply tailored midnight blue Alexander McQueen suit. Her hair styled in sleek, immaculate twists, and her posture radiating absolute, undeniable authority. She wasn't just wealthy. She was the apex predator in a room full of aging prey. Flanked by her Chief of Staff Fiona and the newly loyal VP of Airport Operations, David Cole Jasmine walked to the head of the table. She didn't sit down. She placed her leather portfolio on the mahogany surface and let her gaze sweep across the terrified executives. "Good morning, gentlemen," Jasmine said, her voice smooth, calm, and terrifyingly cold. "I am Jasmine Hayes. As of 4 a.m. yesterday, I am the majority shareholder and Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Airlines. I am sure you have many questions regarding your stock options, your severance packages, and the future direction of this company. But before we discuss any of that, we are going to discuss the rot that has infected the culture of this airline." She gestured to Fiona, who tapped a command into an iPad. The massive OLED screens lining the boardroom walls flickered to life, displaying a harsh, undeniable reality. "Yesterday morning, I attempted to fly out of JFK Terminal 4, unannounced, to gauge the frontline passenger experience." Jasmine began pacing slowly behind her chair. "I did not receive a polite greeting. I did not receive a smooth check-in. Instead, I was racially profiled, illegally detained, and a TSA supervisor named Derek Lawson physically tore my United States passport in half because he decided I did not look like a first-class passenger." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Several executives visibly recoiled. Jonathan Croft shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face draining of color. "Ms. Hayes, I speak for the entire security division when I say we are appalled. That TSA agent was a rogue element. He doesn't represent Vanguard's values. I assure you we will sever ties with him immediately." "You don't need to sever ties with him, Jonathan." Jasmine snapped her eyes, locking onto the VP of Security with laser precision. The Federal Security Director fired him on the spot, and Port Authority police escorted him out of the terminal. He is currently facing federal charges for the destruction of government property. But let's not pretend Derek Lawson was a rogue element. Let's talk about the environment that emboldened him. Jasmine tapped a button on her remote, and a highly detailed data table appeared on the screens. Vanguard Security. Enforcement metrics. Last 36 months. Passenger demographic. Target for random. Secondary screening, rate of document scrutiny. Greater than 3 minutes. Escalation to Port Authority. white/Caucasian, male and female, 4.2%, 1.1%, 0.05%, Asian male and female, 6.8%, 2.4%, 0.12%, Black/African American. Male and female, 28.4%, 14.7%, 4.8%. Middle Eastern/South Asian, 31.2%, 18.9%, 5.2%. Data compiled from Vanguard Internal Audit and TSA JFK Checkpoint Alpha logs. The numbers were glaring, damning, and legally catastrophic. When I acquired this airline, my data science team pulled every single passenger complaint screening log and security metric from your division over the last 3 years. Jasmine said, her voice rising in volume, echoing off the glass walls. Derek Lawson wasn't an anomaly. He was your star pupil. She walked directly down the length of the table, stopping right behind Jonathan Croft's chair. "I have the internal emails, Jonathan," Jasmine whispered, though the silence in the room made it sound like a shout. "I have the memos you sent to the airport security teams, incentivizing them to boost interception metrics to secure additional federal Homeland Security grants. You created a quota system that actively encouraged TSA agents and Vanguard ground staff to target, harass, and delay minority passengers under the guise of heightened vigilance. You monetized racial profiling." Croft stood up his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He was cornered, and like any cornered corporate executive, he lashed out. "You are taking those metrics entirely out of context." Croft raised his voice, pointing a finger at the screen. "Aviation security is a complex, high-stakes environment. We rely on behavioral analysis and intuition. If certain demographics flag our behavioral matrices more frequently, that is a statistical reality, not a systemic bias. I have kept this airline safe for 8 years, and I will not let some Silicon Valley corporate raider come in here and accuse me of—" "You are fired, Jonathan." Jasmine cut him off, her voice dropping like an absolute hammer. The room fell dead silent. Croft froze his finger, still pointing in the air. "You are fired," Jasmine repeated, enunciating every syllable with lethal clarity. "Not with a golden parachute, not with a dignified resignation. You are terminated for cause effective immediately. Your badge has already been deactivated, and Vanguard's legal counsel is currently drafting a comprehensive report of your discriminatory practices to hand over to the Department of Justice and the Department of Transportation." Croft's jaw went slack. The bluster vanished, replaced by the crushing realization that his career was over and his freedom was potentially at risk. He looked around the table for support, but the other executives suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting. No one was going down with this ship. "Fiona," Jasmine said without breaking eye contact with Croft. "Yes, Ms. Hayes," Fiona replied smoothly, signaling to the 2 large corporate security guards standing outside the glass doors. They immediately stepped into the room. "Please escort Mr. Croft to the lobby. His personal belongings will be mailed to him," Jasmine ordered. As Croft was unceremoniously marched out of the boardroom, a deeply ironic parallel to Derek Lawson's exit the day before, Jasmine walked back to the head of the table. She took a moment, letting the sheer shock and awe of the execution settle over the remaining executives. She had just publicly decapitated the old guard. Now it was time to build her empire. "Let me make something perfectly clear to everyone sitting at this table," Jasmine announced, placing her hands flat on the mahogany surface, leaning forward. "The era of Vanguard Airlines, operating as an exclusive arrogant boys' club, is over. We are a service industry. We fly human beings. We connect families, we facilitate business, and we bridge continents. If you cannot treat every single passenger, whether they are wearing a Brioni suit in first class or a faded hoodie in economy, with absolute dignity and respect. You do not belong in my company." She turned back to the screens, switching the slide to a bold, aggressive new restructuring plan. "Effective immediately, we are instituting a zero-tolerance discrimination policy across all customer touchpoints," Jasmine declared. "I'm stripping $40 million from the executive bonus pool. That money is being redirected today. We are raising the hourly wage for all Vanguard gate agents, baggage handlers, and customer service representatives by 30%. You want better employees, you pay them better, and you treat them better." David Cole, who had been watching the masterclass in corporate warfare with wide eyes, finally spoke up. "Ms. Hayes, the frontline staff, they are going to lose their minds, in a good way. Morale has been in the gutter for years. Morale changes when leadership changes, David," Jasmine replied, offering him a brief, approving nod. "Furthermore, we are terminating our premium lane contract with the TSA at JFK. We will be transitioning to a highly vetted third-party private security firm under the SPP program. I want security agents who are trained in hospitality and de-escalation, not just enforcement." Jasmine picked up her portfolio, her point thoroughly made. The boardroom previously, a den of hostile executives, was now completely subjugated. They knew she wasn't just a figurehead. She was a force of nature. "You have 24 hours to review the new operational guidelines," Jasmine said, walking toward the exit. "If you are not on board with this cultural shift, leave your resignation with Fiona by 5 p.m. Have a productive day, gentlemen." She walked out of the boardroom, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind her, leaving a profoundly changed Vanguard Airlines in her wake. 1 week later, the familiar hum of JFK's Terminal 4 surrounded Jasmine once again. But this time, the energy was entirely different. She wasn't hiding under a hoodie today, though she remained comfortably dressed in a chic, tailored cashmere travel set. She walked through the massive departure hall alongside David Cole and Helen Ross, the TSA Federal Security Director. The press coverage over the past 7 days had been nothing short of explosive. The story of the young black billionaire CEO having her passport ripped up by a racist TSA agent had gone undeniably viral. The public outrage was swift, but Jasmine's response had been a masterclass in crisis management. She hadn't just complained, she had cleaned house. The firing of Jonathan Croft, the massive raises for frontline workers, and the strict new anti-discrimination protocols had turned a PR disaster into a monumental victory. Vanguard Airlines' stock had surged by 18% in 5 days. As they approached the Vanguard Global Elite lane, Jasmine noticed the immediate changes. The dark, intimidating podiums had been replaced with sleek, welcoming counters. The agents standing there weren't scowling. They were actively greeting passengers with genuine smiles. The transition to the new private security contractors has been smoother than anticipated, Miss Hayes, Helen Ross noted, gesturing to the checkpoint. Despite the jurisdictional headache it had caused, her Helen had profound respect for the way Jasmine had handled the crisis. "They are thoroughly trained in the new protocols, and I can assure you the TSA has implemented a nationwide review of document verification procedures to ensure what happened to you never happens again." "I appreciate that, Director Ross," Jasmine smiled, pulling a sleek, brand-new United States passport from her bag. It had been expedited through the State Department within 24 hours. Accountability breeds improvement. They arrived at Checkpoint Alpha. A young professional security agent in a crisp white shirt and navy tie stepped forward. He immediately recognized his CEO, his eyes widening slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Welcome back," the agent said, warmly gesturing to the scanner. "May I please scan your boarding pass and passport?" "Good morning," Jasmine replied, handing over the documents. The agent didn't scrutinize her face. He didn't check the lamination. He simply placed the passport on the biometric reader. A pleasant chime echoed from the machine, a green light flashing instantly. He handed it back with a polite nod. "You're all set, ma'am. Have a wonderful flight to London." It took less than 30 seconds. No ego, no hostility, just efficiency and respect. Jasmine turned to David Cole. "Keep up the good work, David. I want weekly reports on passenger satisfaction metrics while I'm in Europe. Let's make sure this standard is maintained across every hub. You have my word." "Jasmine," David beamed. "Have a safe trip." 20 minutes later, Jasmine walked down the jet bridge and stepped aboard Vanguard Flight 88. As she entered the first-class cabin, the lead flight attendant, a veteran employee named Marcus, wait-scratch, that a veteran employee named Julian, no, a veteran employee named Simon, greeted her with a bright, genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Hayes," Simon said, taking her coat. "We are incredibly honored to have you flying with us today." "It's great to be here, Simon." "Thank you," Jasmine replied. She settled into Seat 1A, the massive, luxurious suite at the front of the aircraft. She buckled her seatbelt and looked out the oval window at the sprawling tarmac of JFK. The rain from a week ago was gone, replaced by clear, brilliant blue skies. As the massive Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate, the deep, resonant roar of the Rolls-Royce engines vibrated through the cabin. The aircraft taxied to the runway, gathering speed before lifting gracefully into the air, breaking the bounds of gravity. Jasmine leaned back in her plush leather seat, closing her eyes as the plane banked eastward over the Atlantic Ocean. The hostile takeover was complete. The bullies had been unseated. The rot had been excised. She had bought an airline, but more importantly, she had reclaimed its soul. And as the plane climbed above the clouds, Jasmine Hayes knew with absolute certainty that the sky was no longer the limit. It was just the beginning. The ultimate power move isn't just winning the game. It's changing the rules so that bullies and tyrants can never play again. Jasmine Hayes proved that true leadership isn't about wielding power to intimidate, but using it to protect, uplift, and revolutionize an entire system. From a ripped passport to a total corporate takeover, she showed that standing your ground is always worth the fight. If this story of justice, karma, and corporate revenge inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable real-life stories.